There's bad news for the United States in West Asia, or should I say more bad news. This time, courtesy the United Arab Emirates. Here's what they've done. The UAE has pulled back from a US-led maritime coalition. It's called the CMF, or the Combined Maritime Forces. Some background first. The CMF is a coalition of 38 nations. Its job is to tackle maritime threats in the Red Sea and the Gulf. Things like smuggling and piracy, but unofficially it's also meant to counter Iran. The UAE says it withdrew from the CMF 2 months ago, but the CMF website still mentions the UAE. So it's not clear what the situation is, whether the UAE has pulled out from the coalition or just the operations. Either way, it's a big blow to the US. The question is, what led to it? Well, the US media is floating a theory. Here's what the Wall Street Journal reported on Tuesday. It blames the recent tanker seizures by Iran. 2 oil tankers were seized in the last 2 months. The Wall Street Journal says the UAE was not happy with the US response. They wanted something tougher. Could that be a reason behind this withdrawal? Possible. But the UAE has tried to downplay it. They say the Wall Street Journal report is a mischaracterization. Perhaps it is. But the broader story here is not about tankers. It's about the downward spiral in UAE-US relations. 2 major factors have contributed to it. One is the lack of trust in America's security guarantees. We saw what happened in Afghanistan. We are also seeing what's happening in Ukraine. US guarantees are not bulletproof anymore. The UAE had first-hand experience of that. Let me tell you what happened last year. In January 2022, Houthi drones struck an oil facility in Abu Dhabi. 2 Indians were killed in that strike. Afterwards, the UAE boosted its air defense. It decided to keep F-16 jets in the air at all times. And that meant mid-air refueling, which was done by the US. But guess what happened later? US officials demanded payments for the refueling. Basically, they sent a bill. Reports say the UAE leadership felt insulted. After all, allies don't pay for defense missions. Anyway, that's one reason. America's waning strength as a security guarantor. The second reason is linked to the first. Like most countries, the UAE is looking to diversify. It has built relations with China and Russia. In October last year, the UAE's president, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, met Vladimir Putin in Russia. He has also refused to condemn the Ukraine war. So the UAE is looking out for partners. China is another one. The UAE is using Huawei to roll out their 5G network. Most Western nations have banned it, but not the UAE. Reports say they are also building a port with China. It's located close to Abu Dhabi. Construction had been halted in 2021 after the US raised concerns. But looks like it's back on. That's what America's Discord leaks say. US spy agencies spotted new construction at the Chinese facility. This was around December last year. So all in all, things are not looking good for the US. Donald Trump began US disengagement from West Asia. Joe Biden has continued it. Perhaps it's a popular policy back home. But in West Asia, it has been counterproductive. Traditional US allies like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are looking elsewhere. They realize China has the appetite and the money. The UAE's bilateral trade with China is around $64 billion annually. But what's it with the US? Just around $23 billion. So financially, it makes sense. Like most Gulf countries, the UAE is also diversifying away from oil, and that requires investment and technology. Just so happens China can give both. Does that mean it's game over for US? Well, not so fast. Military alliances and cooperation are not built overnight. US weapons still form the backbone of the UAE's arsenal. It has bought American weapons worth $20 billion in the last decade. It is also home to one of the largest F-16 fleets. All that equipment will need parts and servicing. So this is not a relationship that can be discarded overnight, but it's a trajectory that will worry Washington. Like all relations, diplomatic ones don't disappear overnight. They die by 1,000 cuts. The UAE's most recent move is one such cut. But US President Joe Biden's troubles don't end at West Asia. China, too, is testing his administration's patience. Key leaders seem frustrated. They're now expressing their anger in public. Like the US Secretary of State, yesterday he slammed China.
It's clearly in the interest of both countries. The most dangerous thing is not to communicate and, as a result, to have a misunderstanding and miscommunication.
So what is Blinken talking about? This encounter in South China Sea. We told you about it yesterday. A Chinese jet buzzed American spy plane last week. Look at how close that fighter was. The American plane's cockpit was shaking. Blinken called China's actions dangerous.
Chinese pilot took dangerous action in approaching the plane very, very closely. There have been a series of these actions directed not just at us, but at other countries in recent months.
He's clearly unhappy. One American newspaper described those comments as scolding. What's fueling this? China's decision to rebuff America. US wants to resume dialogue with China. They want to keep lines of communication open. But the Chinese refuse to play ball. This week, they had a chance. US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is visiting Asia. He reached out to his Chinese counterpart. They were supposed to cross paths in Singapore at a security summit. Perfect opportunity to sit down and break the ice. But Beijing refused. They rejected America's invite. Austin himself wasn't pleased. He has now issued a warning. Austin says the situation could go out of hand.
I'm concerned about, at some point, having an incident that could very, very quickly spiral out of control. But again, I would welcome any opportunity to engage with leadership. I think defense departments should be talking to each other on a routine basis, or should have open channels for communication.
Obviously, he's talking about what happened in the South China Sea. And he's right. Any mid-air confrontation raises the risk of conflict. It has happened before in 2001, again in the South China Sea. A Chinese fighter and a US spy plane collided. The Chinese plane crashed, its pilot was killed. The US plane was crippled. It landed in China. The incident led to a standoff. China did not release the US aircrew. For 11 days, there was considerable back and forth and a lot of blame game too. China demanded a formal apology from the United States. It didn't get one. Instead, US said it had regretted the incident. There was no formal admission of guilt, and the American crew was released. That's how the standoff ended. What would happen if the same nightmare were to repeat? It will not be the same. A lot has changed. China now has a much bigger economy, and its military has undergone sweeping modernization. In terms of pure numbers, China has the world's largest navy. So the PLA won't shy away from a fight. Xi Jinping on repeated occasions has asked his troops to prepare for war. This week, he asked them to improve their readiness. The Chinese president met his top national security officials. He asked them to think about the worst case scenarios and prepare. I have his statements with me. Listen to this. He says the complexity and difficulty of the national security issues we now face have increased significantly. We must adhere to bottom line thinking and worst case scenario thinking and get ready to undergo the major tests of high winds and rough waves and even perilous stormy seas. And so that message came with specific instructions. Xi Jinping wanted his officials to speed up the modernization of China's national security system, even enhance capabilities. He also asked for improvements to internet oversight. How would America see this? Xi Jinping is not showing any interest in diplomacy. Instead, he has prioritized strengthening his military. Perhaps the Chinese president wants to negotiate from a position of strength. But under present circumstances, there are no signs that a dialogue will resume. Maybe America will respond again by bolstering its own defenses. And that only raises the specter of conflict. Now, have you heard the saying, don't dig a hole for yourself? Well, guess who hasn't? China. Because Beijing is digging a hole. It's not just any other hole. It will be over 32,800 feet deep into the Earth's crust. China calls it a part of its exploration efforts. The drilling began in the Xinjiang region on Tuesday. But what is Beijing planning to find? Our next report tells you all about it.
China is drilling into the Earth's crust, digging a 32,808 feet hole. Once done, it'll be the country's deepest ever borehole. The drilling is happening in the Tarim Basin, located in China's oil-rich Xinjiang region. But why is Beijing digging such a deep hole? The answer is scientific exploration. China wants to study the areas of the planet, ones that lie deep below the Earth's surface. In 2021, Chinese President Xi Jinping talked about deep Earth exploration, pushing for advancement in this field. This expedition is a step towards that. Not just that, it'll help China unearth rich minerals and even energy resources. On top of that, it could also help evaluate risks of disasters, like earthquakes or even volcanic eruptions. So, how exactly do you drill a hole this deep into the Earth? According to Chinese media, the drill has a design depth of 11,100 meters. That is over 36,000 feet. So it'll drill into the ground, penetrating over 10 continental strata, which is basically layers of rock. What the drilling aims to reach is the Cretaceous system, rocks that date back 145 million years. Now, the drilling process is not without its own challenges. There's a harsh environment on the ground. Once you go deeper, the conditions worsen. The further you go down, the higher the temperature gets. Sometimes it even gets too hot to go any further. But this isn't the first time this is being done. In fact, this isn't even the deepest hole that's being dug. That honor lies with Russia's Kola super deep borehole. That one was dug over a period of 20 years. The drilling process began around 1970. It reached a depth of 40,230 feet in 1989. But work on that borehole stopped in 1992. That's because temperatures touched 180 degrees Celsius. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the project soon shut down 3 years later. Not just that, the United States and Germany too attempted to do the same. The US began Project Morehole in the early 1960s, but it was soon called off due to skyrocketing costs. Germany too attempted to pull off the impossible in 1990. Even that project was soon shut down. So, will China be successful where others have failed? Only time will tell.
Novak Djokovic has landed in hot water. The usual, I guess. He's playing the French Open in Paris, but back home, there's trouble. The conflict between his country, Serbia, and Kosovo has flared up again. We'll discuss the conflict in detail, but first, let's focus on Djokovic. He played his first round match on Monday. After winning, he wrote something on the camera. This is what it says. Kosovo is the heart of Serbia. Stop the violence. No prizes for guessing which side he's on. Djokovic is criticizing the government in Kosovo, but he's ruffled some feathers in France too. Here's what the French sports minister said. It was a message that is very activist, that is very political. You shouldn't get involved, especially in the current circumstances, and it shouldn't happen again. So France says, stop the messages. But Djokovic is not interested. In fact, he has doubled down. Listen to this.
I don't mind saying that. I mean, I would say it again, but I don't need to because you have my quotes if you want to reflect on that. I mean, of course, I'm aware that a lot of people will disagree, but it is what it is. It's something that I stand for. So that's all. Drama-free Grand Slam. I don't think it can happen for me.
Kosovo wants action against Djokovic. It wants the International Olympic Committee to discipline him. But here's the problem. The Grand Slam rulebook doesn't prohibit political messages. Players can speak on controversial issues, which means Djokovic cannot be punished. Now let's focus on the conflict in Kosovo. So what's that all about? Kosovo was once a province of Serbia. It declared independence in 2008. Around 99 countries, including the United States and the UK, recognized it. The rest do not. Even India does not recognize Kosovo. The current conflict is centuries old, and it's rooted in emotions and demography. Around 92% of Kosovo's population is Albanian. They reject Serbian control. They say Kosovo is their own country. Only 6% of the population is Serbian. Most of them live in the north, close to the Serbian border. That's where the clashes broke out. Serbia considers Kosovo to be the heart of its statehood and religion. It is home to many Serb Orthodox monasteries. That's what Djokovic wrote as well. Kosovo is the heart of Serbia. But the truth is, the vast majority of people in Kosovo disagree. In fact, in 1998, they rebelled to get rid of Serbian rule. Serbia responded with a brutal crackdown. That's when NATO intervened and bombed Serbia. Since then, a NATO contingent is stationed there. So now you know what the conflict is all about. But why the sudden flare-up? Well, last month, local elections were held in northern Kosovo. The Serbs boycotted it. So naturally, the Albanian candidates won. They tried moving into local offices with police help, but the Serbs blocked them. Tear gas was fired and clashes broke out. It's a very complicated and divisive issue. Not for Djokovic, of course. Like most Serbs, he firmly opposes Kosovo. I won't say I'm surprised. Djokovic is known for his overt political messaging. Remember his vaccine drama? Djokovic refused to take the COVID-19 vaccine in the year 2022. Yet, he turned up in Melbourne to play the Australian Open. Now, Australia's laws made vaccination mandatory. So, Djokovic was deported from the country. My point is, controversies are not new for Djokovic, whether it's destroying rackets on court, hitting balls at line umpires, or commenting on highly political issues. In this case, the law supports Djokovic. He cannot be stopped from making political statements at the French Open. Nonetheless, let's focus on what he said. Stop the violence. Is there any chance of that happening? Leaders from Kosovo and Serbia are in Moldova today. They are attending a diplomatic summit. Needless to say, they traded blame.
The situation in Kosovo, in north of Kosovo as we speak, is quite tense, although it has been more quiet in the past 2 days. And it's caused because President Vučić of Serbia is inciting, politically supporting, as well as financially supporting illegal structures that have turned into criminal gangs.
Serbia will do its best and its utmost to de-escalate the situation, which means that we'll attempt to persuade Serbs to protest calmly and peacefully. Of course, they are very determined, they are very decisive.
Both Serbia and Kosovo are led by nationalists, so chances of a long-term resolution seem unlikely. But an end to the recent flare-up would be welcome. No thanks to Djokovic, of course. And we now move to Japan. Hope you remember the devastating earthquake and tsunami that struck Japan in 2011. It continues to haunt not just Japan, but its neighbors too. This time, the scare is over nuclear wastewater. In 2011, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant was destroyed by a massive tsunami. 3 reactors of that nuclear plant suffered a meltdown. And over the years, the plant operators' woes have gone from bad to worse. It now has over 1 million metric tons of nuclear wastewater on its hands. And now, it needs to dispose of this water on an urgent basis. Just because the Fukushima nuclear plant is running out of storage space. But where will this water be disposed of? In the Pacific Ocean. That's what's led to a major controversy. Also, a PR crisis for Japan. Our next report tells you all about it.
This is how the streets of Tokyo looked on May 16th. These are people protesting against Japan's planned discharge of nuclear wastewater into the ocean. And it's not just people in Japan who are protesting. Entire countries have their fears regarding Japan's water dumping plans, like South Korea, China, and various nations in the Pacific Ocean, because it's the Pacific Ocean where all the nuclear wastewater will be dumped, about 1 million metric tons of it. Japan announced its plans to release the wastewater in 2021. The release is expected to begin in the next few months, notwithstanding opposition to the move. Japan's nuclear regulators are going to conduct safety checks at a newly constructed water discharge facility. And Tokyo will also wait for a final report by the International Atomic Energy Agency before releasing the water. The report is expected to come out later this month. An IAEA team is already in Japan. In the next 5 days, they'll conduct a review. The team has experts from 11 countries, but they are not the only ones scrutinizing this. Last month, a team of 20 South Korean experts visited Japan. They inspected various facilities at the Fukushima nuclear plant. In South Korea, the popular opinion is weighed against Japan's plan. According to surveys, 85% of South Koreans oppose the move. What about experts? They are still on the fence.
We have made meaningful progress in the scientific and technical review process through on-site inspection and securing detailed data. But additional analysis and confirmation work is needed for a more accurate conclusion. Since our country is the closest country related to the Fukushima water release, we are reviewing whether Japan's water release plan is appropriate from a scientific and technical perspective.
Japan argues that the water is absolutely safe for discharge and that it will have no impact on the environment or aquatic life. In fact, Japan says the water is safe to drink. It has been treated through the Advanced Liquid Processing System, or ALPS. This process removes 62 radioactive materials. That might sound like a lot, but it's not enough. An isotope of hydrogen, tritium, can't be removed with the ALPS process. And this is an isotope that has the potential to alter DNA. But Japan has a plan, a possible workaround to the tritium problem. The ALPS-treated water will be diluted with seawater. The dilution will reduce tritium levels and make the water safe to consume. Japan doesn't really have an option other than getting rid of the wastewater. Remember, there is 1 million metric tons of it. The Fukushima nuclear plant already has more than 1,000 tanks. They're completely full, and space for more water is running out. Couple that with the fact that release could take decades. This is indeed a predicament for Tokyo. Perhaps that's why Pacific nations, including South Korea, are now softening their stand. But while the governments may relent, the people aren't convinced that the water is safe.
Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.